They say he only appears before disaster. A warning, a curse, a shadow in the night sky with glowing red eyes. This is Clara Morgan, and tonight we're going to Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The year is 1966. A quiet town nestled by the Ohio River, where the fog hangs low and the silence of the woods feels just a little too deep. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. That November, something strange began to unfold. Not just one isolated event, but a wave of sightings, panic, and tragedy that would mark this town forever. It all started on the night of November 12th in the small and overgrown cemetery near just outside Point Pleasant. 5 gravediggers were preparing a site before night fully settled, when one of them looked up and froze. Hovering above the trees was a figure. Not quite a bird, not quite a man. It was huge. Wings stretched at least 10 feet across, and its eyes glowed red, like hot coals piercing through the dusk. The men ran. One of them, later interviewed, said, "I've never seen anything like it. It didn't flap its wings. It just glided, like it was watching us." That was only the beginning. Just 3 days later, on November 5th, a young couple, Roger and Linda Scarberry, along with their friends Steve and Mary Millette, were driving past an abandoned TNT factory on the outskirts of Point Pleasant. That place had always been eerie, left over from World War II. The old power plant was surrounded by thick woods and underground tunnels, but that night, something was different. The 4 of them saw what they thought was a man standing in the shadows, but as their headlights hit it, they realized it wasn't a man at all. It stood over 7 feet tall, with massive wings folded behind its back. And again, those red eyes, glowing, watching. Linda screamed. Roger slammed the gas pedal, but the creature didn't stay behind. It took off straight up into the air and began following their car, matching their speed, gliding above them as they raced down Route 62 at over 100 miles per hour. Every time they looked back, it was there, silent, relentless. They finally made it back to town, and in a panic, reported it to the police. That same night, Officer Millard Halstead interviewed the group. He had known them for years. They weren't the kind of kids to make things up, and they were genuinely terrified. When he returned to the TNT area hours later, there was no sign of the creature, but his radio crackled with static, and a strange high-pitched frequency filled the cruiser. He described it later as a pressure in the skull, like something was watching from the trees. And that's when Clarice me first became obsessed with the Mothman. I was just a kid when my father, a retired trucker from Charleston, told me stories about that winter, about the strange lights in the sky, the phone calls with no one speaking, the sightings people were too afraid to report. He said the town felt cursed, like something had settled in, something ancient and angry. And it wasn't just watching, it was waiting. Waiting for what? We didn't know then, but we would find out, in the worst way possible. The days that followed felt like a fever dream for the people of Point Pleasant. Within a week, over a dozen sightings had been reported, not just by teenagers or late-night drivers, but by teachers, firefighters, even a local pastor. They all described the same thing, a winged figure, taller than a man, with eyes that burned like embers. But it wasn't just the creature. Something else was happening. People began receiving unmarked phone calls, static-filled lines, silence on the other end, or sometimes breathing. Some claimed they heard faint clicking noises. A few said the voice when there was one sounded mechanical, cold, rehearsed. And then there were the men in black. Not like in the movies. These men wore outdated suits, moved stiffly, and asked strange, specific questions. They didn't introduce themselves, and they always knew too much. Several witnesses claimed these visitors told them to keep quiet about what they'd seen or risk serious consequences. One woman, Connie Carpenter, had been driving home from church when she saw the Mothman perched on a billboard. It flew directly toward her windshield, and for weeks after, she experienced temporary blindness. Doctors couldn't explain it. Her boyfriend, who went searching for the creature near the TNT area, was allegedly abducted by men in a black sedan and dumped in Kentucky, traumatized and silent. The town felt like it was unraveling. And that's when Clara began collecting stories. I was a junior high student then, just 11 years old. But I had a notebook where I wrote down everything I overheard. From my dad's old CB radio, from hushed conversations at the diner, from my neighbors whispering on porches late at night. No one would talk to the newspapers, but they would talk to me, a kid, innocent, curious. One of the strangest accounts I gathered was from a woman named Mrs. Alvakeen, who lived near the Mason County Fairgrounds. She told me she had seen the creature standing in her backyard, arms outstretched like a scarecrow, not moving as if waiting for her to approach. She never did. She said she closed the curtain and locked her door, and for weeks afterward, her dog refused to go near the back fence. And then, there was the dreams. Dozens of people started reporting the same recurring nightmare, a bridge collapsing, cars sinking into cold black water, people screaming. Some said they saw the red eyes in the dream. Others said they heard a voice saying, "It's coming. You've been warned." One woman, a school teacher named Ruthie Adams, said she dreamed of standing on the bridge and watching it ripple, like rubber before snapping apart. When she woke up, her hands were covered in bruises she couldn't explain. As the year turned to December 1967, the unease became unbearable. Many in the town didn't talk about Mothman anymore because it had stopped, but because they were afraid it would hear them. People kept their blinds closed, locked their doors at dusk. The woods outside town grew quieter. Even the birds seemed to leave. And then, on December 15, 1967, it happened. At exactly 5:04 p.m., just as rush hour traffic filled the Silver Bridge connecting point, Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio, the structure collapsed without warning, without mercy. It was just a few days before Christmas. The streets of Point Pleasant were lit with string lights and wreaths, children bundled in coats, parents rushing to finish shopping, and the usual evening rush hour traffic crawling across the Silver Bridge, that narrow stretch of steel that connected West Virginia to Ohio. Then at 5:04 p.m. on December 15, 1967, the unthinkable happened, without a storm, without warning, without any visible cause. The bridge snapped. It started with a low, metallic groan that witnesses described as sounding like the scream of twisted bones. One of the support chains failed. Then the entire structure rippled, buckled, and fell. Cars plunged into the icy Ohio River. Screams echoed from the collapsing group. People trapped in vehicles were swept away by the current or pinned beneath thousands of pounds of twisted steel. 46 people lost their lives that evening. Men, women, children. Some bodies were never recovered. Clara Morgan was across town with my father, shopping for canned goods. We heard the sirens, and then the fire department's phone line jammed with call after call. I remember a man running into the store, face pale as paper, yelling, "The bridge is gone." Panic swept through the streets. The National Guard arrived within hours. Divers were pulled in from neighboring counties. The Red Cross set up tents near the shore. Families gathered near the edge of the river, watching in horror as headlights blinked beneath the water's surface. But the worst part, some survivors said they saw something just before the collapse. A large, dark figure perched on top of the bridge, wings outstretched. One trucker, who managed to slam his brakes just in time, told police he saw a shape like a man, but bigger, with red eyes glowing like flares. He was so shaken, he couldn't speak for hours. A young woman named Carla Hutchins told me years later that her mother was in one of the cars that went down. That morning, her mother had told her she had a bad feeling and couldn't stop dreaming of falling metal and black water. Carla said she still keeps the dream journal her mother wrote in, and on the very last page, dated December 14th, are the words, "It's coming. I can feel it watching." The newspapers covered the tragedy extensively, but they didn't mention the Mothman. They didn't talk about the nightmares, the phone calls, the men in black, the sightings leading up to the collapse. No, the official story was a stress, fracture in an eye bar, a structural failure due to corrosion, logical, mechanical. But for those of us in Point Pleasant, we knew better. The bridge collapse wasn't the end of the story, it was the climax. And after that night, the sightings stopped. The red eyes vanished, the phone calls ceased, the Mothman was gone. Some believe it was a harbinger, a warning we failed to understand. Others believe it caused the disaster, a bringer of death cloaked in wings and shadow. But there's one theory that kept me up for years after, and if you're still with me, if the lights are low and the night is quiet, I'll tell you what that theory is. In the years after the Silver Bridge collapse, Point Pleasant tried to heal. New buildings were erected. The riverbank was rebuilt. Life, as it always does, moved forward. But not everyone forgot. Not everyone could. And I, Clara Morgan, couldn't stop digging. By the time I was in college, the legend of the Mothman had spread beyond West Virginia. It was whispered in conspiracy circles, written into obscure paranormal books, and even featured in late-night radio shows. But what bothered me most wasn't the folklore, it was the silence from those who had lived it. Why did so many of the original witnesses disappear? Why did those who had spoken up stop talking? In 2003, I got a letter. No return address, just a P.O. box in Marietta, Ohio, across the river. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, no greeting, no sign-off. It said, "If you want to know the truth about what really happened in 1967, meet me behind the old armory at 2 a.m., November 17th. Come alone. Do not bring a recorder." I shouldn't have gone, but of course, I did. I arrived just before 2. The air was bitter cold. Fog clung low to the ground like something alive. The armory had been shut down for years, its brick walls cracking, the windows long boarded up. At 2:07, a man stepped out from behind a dumpster. He looked to be in his late 70s, dressed in a mechanic's coat, hat pulled low. But his eyes, they were sharp, watching me like he'd been doing it for decades. "I remember you," he said. "You used to carry a red notebook. You wrote down everything." I nodded. "Are you one of the original witnesses?" He lit a cigarette. "I saw more than the Mothman." He introduced himself only as Thomas Art. He used to work maintenance for the chemical plant near the TNT area. One night, back in October 1967, he was on a solo patrol near the restricted bunkers, old munitions igloos from World War II, when he saw a light in the woods. Not a flashlight, not a lantern. It hovered, glowed blue, made no sound. Thomas swore he followed it for almost 10 minutes. It always stayed 20 feet ahead of him. Then without a noise, it vanished. But when he turned back to leave the woods, there it was. The Mothman, 10 feet tall, wings wrapped tight around its body like a cocoon, head tilted, red eyes boring into him. But it didn't move, he said. Didn't chase me. It just watched, like I was the one being studied. I asked him what he thought it was. He looked up toward the fog-covered sky and said, "It's not from here, and it's not alone." Thomas claimed the government had sealed off parts of the TNT area not because of contamination, but because there was something beneath it. Old tunnels, devices that weren't built by us. He told me of men in suits who visited the plant weeks before the bridge collapsed. He said they brought no tools, no gear, just notebooks, and they asked the same question over and over. Has anything seen you? Before I could ask more, Thomas handed me a manila envelope. I've kept this since the night before the collapse. I was told never to show it to anyone, but I think it's time. Inside were photos, blurry, black and white, but unmistakable. One of them showed the Silver Bridge, taken from the waterline. High above the support beams was a figure, black winged eyes glowing. Another photo showed 3 men standing in the woods near a glowing object, their faces blurred. One was holding what looked like a Geiger counter. The last was a drawing crudely sketched, but chilling, not of Mothman, but of something much bigger, standing behind it, faceless, towering, watching. I didn't sleep that night. Back in my motel room, I laid out the photos on the bed. Every light was on. The hum of the mini fridge filled the silence as I stared into the glowing eyes in those prints. Was it a hoax? An elaborate prank decades in the making? Or was this the first real proof that something otherworldly had been watching us all along? I tried contacting Thomas again. The number he gave me rang once, then disconnected, and the P.O. box in Marietta, vacant. He'd vanished, just like the others. But his envelope changed everything. I brought it to a contact of mine, Dr. Evelyn Marksa, retired physics professor from Ohio State, who had studied electromagnetic anomalies and government cover-ups. She was skeptical at first, until she saw the sketch of the towering figure behind the Mothman. I've seen this before, she whispered. She pulled out a dusty file from her archives. Inside was a declassified military report from 1952, originally filed from Braxton County, West Virginia, just 2 hours from Point Pleasant. It documented sightings of a faceless humanoid over 10 feet tall, accompanied by smaller winged figures. The military labeled it mass hysteria. Dr. Marks didn't agree. These sightings happen in waves, every few decades, and they always start with strange lights and end in tragedy. We reviewed electromagnetic maps of Point Pleasant in the weeks before the Silver Bridge collapsed. The results were chilling. Localized spikes in radiation, inexplicable magnetic pulses near the TNT zone, animals behaving erratically, birds migrating off pattern, and most disturbing, over 11 people reporting vivid dreams of bridges snapping, all within a 5-mile radius. Dreams, warnings, signs no one listened to. That's when Clara did what she always does best. I went back to the source. That following October, I returned to the McClintock Wildlife Management Area, known locally as the TNT Zone. I brought nothing but a notebook, a voice recorder, and a thermos of black coffee. The fog was thicker than I remembered, the silence unnatural. I wandered for an hour, tracing the trail Thomas had described past the overgrown paths, between the decaying bunkers, and into the woods beyond. That's where I felt it, a vibration, deep, faint, like something humming beneath the earth. Then the temperature dropped. My breath became visible in the air, and my skin prickled. I looked up, and there it was, the Mothman, standing silently atop an old munitions dome, wings outstretched, red eyes blazing like twin coals. But this time, it wasn't alone. From behind the dome, a shape emerged, taller, wider, its head nearly grazing the treetops. No face, just a smooth, featureless surface like something carved from darkness itself. My recorder went dead. My flashlight flickered, and in the space of a single heartbeat, they vanished. No sound, no warning, gone. I ran, and when I reached the edge of the forest, I turned back only once. In the distance, through the mist, I saw the glowing eyes watching me, not chasing, just observing, like they were waiting for something. When I returned to town, something had changed. The people of Point Pleasant no longer looked at me with the guarded politeness they did on my first visit. There was something deeper in their eyes now. Recognition, maybe, or fear. Word had spread. the girl who saw them. That's what they called me in whispers at the diner, at the gas station, even at the library. I wasn't just Clara Morgan anymore. I had become part of the story. One afternoon, I received an anonymous voicemail. The voice was elderly, shaking. "You don't know the whole truth," it rasped. "Talk to Eleanor Hayes. She lives alone near the Kanoha River. She saw the bridge fall. She saw him." That name, Eleanor Hayes, had come up once in Thomas's notes, circled in red but never explained. I found her 2 days later, a white clapboard house with wind chimes and peeling paint, nestled behind a row of black pines. She answered the door slowly. Her eyes, they weren't cloudy like most 80. They were sharp, alert, like she had been waiting. "Come in, Clara. I knew you'd find me eventually." Inside, the house was dark. The air smelled like cedar and old books. We sat across from each other in the silence, and she began her story. December 15th, 1967. She'd been on the bridge that day, driving home with her son. They were only halfway across when she saw it. "The birds," she said. "They were fleeing the trees, all at once, like something had startled the earth itself." Then came the low hum, the same vibration I'd felt at the TNT zone. She looked up and saw the Mothman hovering near the bridge cables. "But it wasn't him that scared me," Eleanor whispered. "It was the other one, the tall one, the one without a face. It stood by the water's edge, staring. And when I saw it raise its hand like it was pointing, the bridge gave way." She paused. Tears welled in her eyes. "I lost my boy that day, but I didn't scream, because I knew it was a warning." "A warning?" I asked. She nodded. That something bigger was coming. That the Mothman wasn't a monster. He was the messenger. He was trying to help. My breath caught. "You mean he wasn't causing the disaster? He was predicting it?" Eleanor stared at me for a long time, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a weathered journal. Inside were hand-drawn maps, newspaper clippings, and dozens of dated entries. Each one described dreams, premonitions, sightings, and each ended the same way, with tragedy, fires, floods, collapses. "I kept this so people would remember," she said. "But no one listens anymore. They call it superstition, folklore. But you saw him too, didn't you?" I nodded. Her eyes softened. "Then you know, he's still watching, still waiting, because it's not over." I left her house shaken, not because of fear, but because of clarity. All these years, the Mothman had been misunderstood. He wasn't a creature of death, and if he'd returned now, it meant something else was coming, something worse. Back in my motel room that night, I stared at the journal Eleanor had lent me. The faded pages whispered secrets that governments had buried deep. I remembered the file Dr. Marks showed me, the declassified military report. I dug through online archives until I found more documents from the same era. Top secret memos, surveillance logs, and correspondences between the Pentagon and West Virginia officials. They all mentioned the faceless sentinel. The official stance was clear: dismiss, cover up, and move on. But the documents told another story. In 1952, during the Cold War, the US government was experimenting with strange weapons near the TNT plant. Unexplainable electromagnetic readings and strange biological entities were reported by field agents, entities that defied conventional science. One memo described the faceless sentinel as a possible interdimensional being, observed near the experimental site. Another warned, containment protocols must be enacted if the entity is detected. Do not engage. It was like reading a sci-fi thriller, except this was real, and it explained the silence surrounding Point Pleasant. The Mothman was no mere monster. He was part of something far bigger, a guardian, or a warning beacon, trapped between worlds. But what about the faceless sentinel? Eleanor's journal hinted it was a darker force, a watcher of devastation, indifferent to humanity's suffering. The bridge collapse, the disappearances, They weren't accidents, they were tests. Tests of human resilience against an unknowable power. I sat back, feeling the weight of it all. Then I thought of you, the listeners, the watchers in the dark. Why share this story now? Because the signs are returning. Since 2017, new sightings have emerged across West Virginia and nearby states. Strange lights, unexplained power outages, reports of winged figures. Clara Morgan is telling you this to stay alert, to remember that sometimes the things lurking in the shadows aren't just stories. They are warnings, and the night is far from over. Thank you for joining me on this chilling journey through Point Pleasant. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and subscribe to Clara After Dark. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love hearing from you. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your mind sharper. This is Clara Morgan, signing off from Clara After Dark, where the darkness reveals the truth.